Council work session for August 28th, 2024. My name is Mark Clark. I'm the mayor. I will call the meeting to order. First item on our agenda is the presentation and discussion of the water rate study as completed by FCS Group. And I'll turn that over to staff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just for a real quick introduction to the topic. So this is a project that we've been working on since approximately April of 2023. So a great deal of time and effort has gone into analyzing our fee structure and consumption and all that good sort of stuff, and figuring out where should we be from that perspective of water rates. And so we have been working with FCS Group for the last about a year and a half on this project. And so we have joining us tonight Melanie Hobart from FCS Group. She's the project manager for this particular study. And so she's going to walk us through this. But the reason why this is important for tonight, and I do appreciate everybody taking time to be with us tonight. The reason why this is an important discussion for tonight is because this potentially plays into the September 3rd work session where we're going to be talking about enterprise funds and utility rates and whatnot. So the information that we'll take tonight will likely play over into that meeting. This has gone to the Water and Sewer Board twice. We've had discussions at that level, at which time at the second meeting they did vote to recommend approval to the City Council. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Melanie and let her guide the presentation.
All right, thank you. I am Melanie Hobart. I am a project manager with FCS Group. I have been working with Jackie and her team here at the city for just over a year and a half now, I suppose. And we also worked a couple of years ago on the wastewater study. So I'm familiar with the city and I'm familiar with staff and kind of your issues here. So let's jump in. We've got a lot to cover today. At any time, if you have questions, and of course we'll take questions at the end as well. So we're going to start by looking at the system development fees. And then we're going to get into kind of the meat of the rate study. Once we go through that, we're going to do some background about the process, the annual revenue requirement and what that looks like, and then the cost of service, rate design, the proposed rates, and then, of course, the question everybody wants to know, what this means for your customers, so bill impacts at the end. All right, so for system development fees, a system development fee is a one-time charge. It's charged when a property either connects to the system or redevelops. So it is calculated, there is a standard of how it is calculated. This is regulated. These are heavily challenged and enforced. So this is a pretty scrutinized equation that we're looking at here. What we do is we take the value of the plant in those blue boxes at the top. That's going to be your existing plant in service and any future expansion capital. So anything related to growth in the future, those costs. We're going to then divide that by the system capacity. How many customers can your system serve in total? And then that comes out to a charge per customer or per connection. We will, of course, go through the details of this, but this is kind of the general framework. There are three components of your fee that we're going to look at. There's the city potable infrastructure. There's the city non-potable infrastructure for those customers that it's applicable to. And then there's also a Greeley treatment pass-through. So we'll talk about that. It's currently based on the Greeley treatment costs, but that is flexible and would reflect any treatment contract you had in the future. Wrong computer. Here we go. Right. So we've got three main boxes here. The first one at the top, that's our cost basis. So that's the top of the equation we just looked at. We have your existing cost basis and your future cost basis. And you can see in the columns, that first column is your potable system, and the second column is your non-potable system. So in your potable system, you have about $40.8 million of existing system costs. Those are going to be your reproduction cost of your existing system, less any contributed value. So anything that's come in from a developer or a grant or anything like that is not included in the cost basis. We also have $85.7 million of future growth-related costs in your potable system. So our total cost basis in the potable system is $126.5 million. When we look at the non-pot system, you have $13.3 million in existing assets. Again, that's reproduction costs minus anything donated or contributed. And then there are no future growth costs there. So that's just the full basis of 13.3. So that's our starting point. That's the value. We then take the capacity. When we look at capacity here, We're looking at acre feet. We're going to talk in a couple minutes about how that relates to your new customers as they connect. But for kind of an equal setting, we start with acre feet. So you have 3,536 acre feet of existing capacity in your potable system, and you have 1,200 of future growth planned in your potable system. So that comes to a total of 4,736 acre feet of capacity. In your non-potable system, again, since there's no growth planned there, you just have that 7,335 acre feet of existing capacity. And then when we kind of do the math at the bottom in that green line, you can see that when we take the 126.5 million, we divide it by the 4,736, and we come out to a charge per acre foot, again, per acre foot, so not per new connection yet, but per acre foot of 26,717 for the potable system, 1,810 for the non-potable system, and then 26,270 for Greeley treatment. That is reflecting the existing contract cost. So that is not something we calculated. That's based on Greeley's existing cost. Okay, so how do we go from a charge per acre foot to a charge for a typical customer? What we did was we looked at your existing customers and the use of each type of customer. So for an average, a typical residential customer, we defined what we're calling an EQR, which is an equivalent residential unit. So you can see in that first top row for a potable only customer, so a customer that does not have access to non-pot water. So they're using their water indoors and outdoors. That's 0.46 acre feet of potable water. And then if you are a customer that does have access to the non-pot system, you kind of split that. It's not an exact split, how the numbers came out, but it is a 0.23 acre feet of potable and just a slight lower amount of non-pot there of 0.22 acre feet. So for each connection then, they're about the same. So just under half an acre foot of water. It's just split in terms of which type of water and what they will have access to at that property. We then take that charge per acre foot, so that first column of numbers there, and we apply the portion of the acre foot for each type of customer. So for example, the potable only customer, if they're getting 0.46 acre feet of potable water, that's going to be 0.46 times the 26,717, which is 12,156. I won't walk through all the math, but that's how these come together here. For your customer that has access to the non-potable system, they get that potable charge as well as, or the lower potable charge for their portion, as well as the non-pot charge. And then they also get a proportionate share of the Greeley treatment cost, depending on how much potable water they are buying access to when they connect to the system. What that comes out to, you can see again in that green row, is the total charge for a typical residential customer. That's going to be $24,109 for a customer that only has access to potable, and then $12,455 for a customer that has access to the non-pot system as well. Below that, you can see the existing charges. So it is an increase. We would expect that as you continue to invest in your system, that there would be an increase there. And it's a 40% increase for the potable customer and a 20% increase for the non-potable access as well.
The paperwork I've got has those percentages reversed.
Yes, and that is, let me look really quick. This is correct.
That's correct.
Yes.
You must have
An older version, I apologize. That was something we switched after the first Water Sewer Board meeting. Yeah, it's just the 24,000 over the 17,000, so it's a 40% increase. Yep. Sorry about that. Good question. Anything else on this? I do have as well what this would look like for a non-typical customer. So any residential that either has a larger meter size or a non-residential customer, the fees are based on meter size. So what we see here is how it would scale up. They scale up based on that EQR ratio. In that second column, that reflects the capacity of the meter size based on the amount of water that could go through it. So this would be the full schedule as we scaled up to those larger meter sizes. As we all know, the vast majority of your customers are not in the second half of that table, but this is how the charges would play out.
But we'll let you do, I know you got like 25, 30 slides if I'm not mistaken. And what we'll do is we'll pause like halfway through it and have any questions, and then we'll come back and.
Okay,
at the end.
that works. I'm about to switch to kind of the other half of the study, so if we want to kind of just keep going or pause, whatever, we'll keep going?
Yeah, let's keep going a little bit.
Great. Okay, so that's the system development fees. That new fee is incorporated in the rest of the numbers we're going to look at today. So we are assuming that starting in 2025, as a new customer connects, they would be paying that additional fee. That's something we looked at both ways, so it's not set in stone, of course. That's a decision for you, but just so you know, those numbers have been incorporated. Okay, so for a rate study itself, there are 3 main steps. The first is what we call a revenue requirement. A revenue requirement is the total revenue needed. What are the needs of the system? The revenue annually that comes from rates. So the total amount of revenue you need, that's the first question. The second question, cost of service, is who needs to pay? So with cost of service, I like to think about it as the revenue requirement is a pie. How big of a pie do you have to bake? And then with the cost of service, how big of a slice does each customer type get? So how much of that goes to residential customers? How much of that goes to commercial customers? Those types of questions. And then when we get to rate design, we think about how do you actually charge them? So we then know based on each class, what is an equitable share of the system for them to be paying. And then we get the decision of, within the residential class, how do we design rates in the most fair and equitable way, aligned with your current structures and everything else in your system, to make sure we get that revenue from the appropriate customers. So those are the 3 steps. I'm going to kind of breeze through the first one and just show you the results of it. When we think about a revenue requirement, we take in, and Jackie can speak to this too, we look at the financials for the next 10 to 20 years, and we look at all the costs, we look at your non-rate revenues, so we net those out, and we say, these are your total system costs. How much is it going to cost to fund capital? How much is it going to cost to fund your operating? All of it. And we find the most efficient way to do that, and then we look at what kind of rate adjustments would you need to meet those needs. This is the final answer of that without any of those details. So what this looks at, you can see we've got a 10-year forecast here through 23. And in each year, what this is telling us is that you would need a percent increase. So in 24, you did a 3% increase. In 25 through 28, it's a 6% increase per year. And then it would go down to a 4.25%, which is what we're expecting to be roughly inflationary longer term. So as you get further out, we're not asking rate setting for 2033 today. We always look at a longer forecast just to make sure that as you have needs down the road, we're not setting you up on a cliff or anything like that, that you have what you need for future needs as well. We are also funding capital projects through this. So we worked really diligently and it was an iterative process with staff to determine what we thought, and with the board as well, was the most appropriate way to fund capital projects. So we are using revenue bonds to fund them. We're funding the capital projects 26% debt funded, which means that the remaining capital is either coming through rates, those fees we just talked about, or other outside contributions. So we found that balance in a way that we didn't want to too heavily rely on debt, and this was allowed to kind of buy down the rates a little bit with that debt issuance. So you can see here when those debt issuances are issued. So we have $6.4 million in 26, $5.5 million in 29, and $1.6 million in 32. So you will see here as the rates build, the reliance on debt long-term does go down. So we're getting you through this very capital intense period here, and then longer term, you're going to have less reliance on debt with this plan. Okay, so from here, we're going to be thinking about those 6% increases as we talk about the next step in the process. Okay, so a cost of service. So we've now looked at, we need those 6% per year. That's how big our pie has to be. That's how much revenue we need. In the cost of service, we take that pie and we really figure out who should be paying for what based on how they use the system. So there's 3 steps in a cost of service. The first is to functionalize. To do that, we go through all the costs in the system, line by line in your operating, and we determine what's driving those costs. Is it related to billing? Is it related to supply? Is it related to non-pot? Is it all the different types of functions in your system? So we take our total costs and we split them into different functions. From there, we allocate. We look at each type of cost. So, for example, we have a function called customer. That's going to include all your billing costs. A billing cost doesn't change if you use more water. So when we allocate billing costs in the customer function, we allocate those based on number of accounts, right? We have supply costs. Those don't have anything to do with peaking. We allocate those based on average use. If you use more, you should pay more for supply because it is a function of the amount of water, but it's not a function of the timing of when you use the water. And as we go through each function, we think about what's driving the cost there, and that's how we allocate it to the different customer types. And then the last step here is we distribute it to those customer types. So we think about, for a residential customer, they're going to get an account charge, they're going to get their average cost, and they're going to get a peaking cost. Their peaking may be higher than a multifamily customer. So residential is going to get more peak-related costs than an apartment complex, right? But they probably use less on average than a commercial customer. So they're going to receive less average costs than a commercial customer per account. So we look at, first we take the total cost, we put them into what's driving them, and then we look at how different customer types use the system, and that's how we spread the costs into the different customer groupings. It's a lot of detail and a lot of slicing and dicing, but that's kind of the overview of the process. Okay, so we went through this process. We actually had about, I think it was 14 customer types. We have summarized it here into these 4. And we summarized it into these 4 because these are the 4 that we're going to look at when we do rate design. We wanted to maintain some of the consistencies of the existing rate structure, and that got us here. So what we have is we have a residential potable. That's going to include the potable use, whether or not you have access to non-pot. So if you're a residential potable customer, you might also be a metered non-pot customer or a Willowbrook non-pot customer. So we've got these 4 customer types. They do overlap in that way. You can see in that first column of numbers, after all of that functionalizing, distributing, and allocating, we came up with a total cost of service for each of these classes. We then compare that to the revenue at your existing rates in the equivalent year. So in this case, we're looking at 2028. I do want to point that out. We are going to phase in the results so that there aren't any significant jumps in year 1. So we ran the cost of service for 2028 so that we can use those 3 years, 26, 27, and 28, 25, 4 years, 25 through 28 to phase into the cost of service results. So we're looking at 2028 here. In 2028, you need to collect $11.5 million in rate revenue. You can see that that is the same whether you split it by cost of service or you split it by your existing revenue. So this is a revenue neutral evaluation. We're just thinking about which customers should be paying it and how does that compare to your existing rate structure. What we see in the last 2 columns here is how they compare. So let's look at residential potable. So the cost of service is $8.5 million. The existing rates are expected to collect $9.9 million, just $9 million. And that means that the cost of service is a little bit less than your existing rate structure. So in that year, you would need to bring the rates down by 5.6% to be at cost of service overall for that class. And then we look at, you can kind of go down the line with that same logic. So commercial potable, we need to bring rates up about 16% to be at cost of service. The metered non-pot needs to go up pretty significantly here to hit cost of service. And then Willowbrook does come down. And you can see that summarized at the bottom in terms of who is at or above cost of service and who is below. We do, when we look at cost of service results, we don't expect ever to hit exactly 0% difference. So, even the residential here, we recognize that there are fluctuations year to year in demand, in costs. So within, I would say about 5%, we call that, we'll keep our eye on it, but you're pretty good. So the residential here is pretty close. It is because it is the biggest class that those then, those bigger percentages are taking up kind of that remainder, the dollars all net to zero in the difference there. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so after cost of service, the main goal is to develop rates that are fair and equitable. So we had a couple goals and guidelines. We wanted to make some changes without changing everything. We don't want to kind of, throw the table upside down and start from scratch. So we wanted to add that consistency for your customers where we thought it was reasonable. And in that way, these are the goals that we came up with. So on the left are the general goals. The first, foremost, always, we need to collect enough revenue. That goes without saying, but it needs to be included in any goals. We then wanted to incorporate the cost of service results by class. So we made a couple exceptions there, but that was our goal and we did it, and we'll talk about those. As I already mentioned, we're phasing it in over 4 years, so there's no sudden changes for any individual class. And then we minimized the changes, so we maintained the same meter charge schedule for all customer classes, consistent with where you are now. The charges themselves change, but regardless of what type of customer you are, if you have a 3/4 inch meter, you're going to pay the same fee for that. And then we also maintain the overall rate structures. So we made some tweaks to the residential tiers and kind of where they sit, but we didn't change the tier structure. We didn't go to a uniform. We didn't kind of do anything very different within the individual rate structures. On the right-hand side, you can see our specific goals. So we did, with the meter charges, we increased those by that 6% per year. ATB stands for across the board. So we just floated them up by 6% for each year. That is 4 years worth. So keep that in mind as we look at it, because this is 2028 that we're going to look at. We also, for residential, as I alluded to, we adjusted the tiers a little bit. We added a new lowest tier at 4 kgals. 4 kgals is the average winter consumption for your residential class. When we talk about water rate structures, we are always looking for a way to estimate and understand what we call lifeline or non-discretionary usage. So what amount of water is necessary for cooking, cleaning, just general life, indoor non-discretionary use. We often use that average winter consumption number as that basis, because in the winter you don't have things like, irrigating your lawn or anything like that. So it represents that indoor use. So that's the basis for the 4 kgal tier. That is also consistent with the wastewater rate structure. So when we did wastewater rates several years ago, we included the first 4 kgals in that base fee. So that number is the same threshold, which will add some consistency and hopefully some understandability to customers when they look at their new rates. We also looked at Willowbrook non-pot. So the Willowbrook is on a contract basis. So we have, instead of bringing it down, what we did is we applied the across the board, the 6% to the Willowbrook rates per the contract as it is allowed there. What we did with that additional revenue is we used a little bit of it to offset the non-pot metered rates. And then we also put some aside for potential Willowbrook capital costs in the future. So we used that a little bit to lessen the impact on the non-pot rates throughout the forecast, but that we did that because it was consistent with the contract. Okay, these are the results. So let me walk you through what we're looking at here. At the top, we have the meter charges. Just for simplicity, I've only included the 3/4 inch charge here, just so you can see how it changes throughout the forecast. And the bottom are the different volume charges. So that blue box of the existing, that's your current 24 rates. We have the 3 years of phase-in, and then we have the 28 cost of service. So the rates in the last column will bring us to that 11.5 million of revenue that we looked at before. And the years in between, they're going to collect the necessary revenue each year, but they're phasing towards cost of service in 28. So for the fixed meter charges, as I mentioned on the last slide, those are going up by that 6% per year. So that's how those are changing. We're going from 23.25 up to 29.35 for your inside city customers. We are maintaining that similar structure where the outside meter fees are $1 above the inside meter fees. So no change there. We're just changing those with the across the board annual needs. When we look at the volume charges, You can see here for the residential, that's that first 4 rows of fees. In the existing, you'll notice that the first 2, the 1 to 4,000 gallons, and then the 4,001 to the 16,000 gallons, those are the same rate in your existing rate structure because you do not have that tier split out. So currently, your customers are paying $5.98 per kgal or per 1,000 gallons, all the way up to 16 kgals. When we look in that next year, and you can see it in 2025, we do make that change. We split that out. So the 2025 rate for those first 4 kgals actually goes down by 9 cents, and then the next 12 kgals goes up to accommodate for that. And then as we phase in over time, you can see how those spread across and how they relate to each other. We did maintain the same ratio between the tiers as you currently have. So we didn't want to shift that, any of those goals. We've just used your customer data and your demand and the new revenue we need, and we phased it in here through the tier structure with that adjustment of splitting that first tier into 2 now. We've done the same thing with your customers who do have access to non-pot. So the difference in those 2 first blocks you'll see is that if you do not have access to non-pot, you get an extra tier in there from 16 to 22 kgals before you jump up to that highest per kgal cost. That's your existing rate structure. We're not changing that. So that will hold the same as we go forward, but you will see that same split in the first 4 kgals of happening in 25 and going forward. So there's a lot going on there, but for the residential, the main message is overall the structure isn't changing. The way it is, we're just splitting that first tier to allow for a little bit of relief for your lowest use customers. And we'll see who that impacts in a couple minutes. But that's the main change there. When we look at the commercial rates, you can see that those are just increasing throughout the forecast. Those are currently uniform. So if you use 1 kgal or if you use 50 kgals, you're still going to pay the same amount per kgal. It's not tiered like the residential. We're maintaining that structure, and you can see how that changes throughout the forecast. The non-pot, I think, is maybe as we saw from the cost of service results, the biggest increase throughout the forecast. So I do want to flag that. You can see it's at 303 currently, and by 2028, it gets up to 601. And then the Willowbrook, that again, just like the meter fees, is going up by 6% year over year.
I just wanted to mention, we had the conversation in Water and Sewer Board about how the tiers actually function. And so I think if you don't know, it's a good time to illustrate how your actual tiers are calculated in your bill. So if you were somebody that used somewhere in that 4,000 to 16,000 gallons next year under this new rate structure, you wouldn't pay $7.36 for your entire usage. You pay that lowest dollar amount, so $5.89 for your first 4,000 gallons, and then anything over the 4,000 gallons, you would be charged at that next tier, and so on. So it's a theme in the education piece that we share often in our customer service unit, just to understand how that bill works.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really excellent point. So as Jackie was just saying, everybody will pay $5.89 for those first 4 kgals. The 5th kgal will go up to $7.36 for all customers. So that's how it works. It's not, if you use 17, you're not going to pay that $11.63 for all 17. Everybody gets the first 4 at the lowest, and as you move up, that next one triggers the next rate. So, okay. Just to reiterate the changes here, we do have that new lowest tier at 4 kgals. As I mentioned, that is the average winter demand for your residential customers. That's pretty typical for what we see around the region. And that's considered your lifeline or non-discretionary usage. So that's really important. That's why we based it there. We wanted to give that little bit of relief for that water use. When we look at what that means for your customers, so as we just said, all the customers get those first 4 kgals at the lowest rate, and 49% of the bills that go out are 4 kgals or less. So half of the bills are going to be only in that first tier. When we look at the customers who have a non-pot access as well, it's much higher than that. So it's 58% of bills are only going to be in that first tier. So this is something that's impacting a lot of people. I will say that when I say bills, I don't mean annual bills, I mean monthly. So, most likely everybody's gonna, or most people are gonna see a lower winter bill and potentially a slightly impacted summer bill, and we'll look at how that plays out. But it is a very large portion of your water customers that will only fall into this first tier, and that's why we wanted to focus on it. Okay, so this has got a lot going on. Let me walk you through it. So when we look at this chart on the left-hand side, that's the change in bill from the existing rate structure to the proposed rate structure. So how many dollar change, what's the dollar change with the new rate structure? On the right-hand side, that axis is the percent of bills. So we were just talking about that. You can see in the green box there, 49% of bills. This is just for customers without non-pot, but 49% of the bills are at that 4 kgals or less. And as you go up, you can see 63% of bills are going to decrease. It's at that 6 kgal mark that the bill will be higher versus lower, right? So up to then, your bill is going to decrease if you use through 5 kgals. If you use 6, it's going to go up, less than $1, and then you can see how that impact goes up throughout the usage. And that's what the blue bars are. That's your dollar change per bill at each level of demand. So if you say, for example, if I used 14 kgals on one of my summer bills, that would be right by that purple line, and you notice that 90% of bills are 14 or less. So 90% of bills that go out are at that level. They're going to see an increase of $9 or less monthly. So there's a lot going on here, but that is this. I think the value of this graphic is really showing, those blue bars, they get pretty tall, but that's a really small percentage of your customers. The majority of your customers are going to see that. 90% are going to see a $9 or less impact on their bill. And this is for the customers without non-pot. So these are the customers who are using more also. So if we looked at the equivalent for the customers with access to non-pot, the whole thing would be skewed even further to the left in terms of percent of bills going out. Okay, what does this mean for individual customers? This is the same information, just put differently. So we have on the left, those are your winter bill impacts, and on the right are your summer bill impacts. We have 3 usage levels, and those are marked in the labels. So let's start on the left here. If we have a low user, we're assuming that's 3 kgals of use, so 3,000 gallons. We have 4 bars. That's going to be your existing rates if you do not have access to non-pot. And then the orange is going to be the equivalent in the proposed rate. So the dark blue to the orange is the comparison, the light blue to the yellow, as we look at each of these at each usage level. So you can see here, as we would expect to see, that at low and average for your winter bills, the low is going to go down, the average is going up those couple cents, but when you get to high, those higher users, their bills are going to go up. So if you're using 15 kgals, your bill is going to go up. It'll be a little bit more than that $9 mark we saw for the 90% of bills at 14 kgals. When we look at summer, it's the same rate structure. It's just you get a little bit higher usage. So when we look over here, you can see that the impact for those customers without non-pot is higher in the existing and the proposed, but a little bit higher in the proposed as you get up to those higher usage levels. So the message is the same on both sides here. For your lowest users, the structure will be a little bit less, and that's going to include the majority of your winter bills for your customers, as well as some summer bills for customers. And then as usage goes up, the impact increases. Okay, so for commercial, same winter versus summer. On the left, we have the existing, as we would expect. The bills are going to go up based on the cost of service results. We do need to increase above that 6% across the board. And that's why we're seeing that impact. That's all that is here. It's just that increase to get to cost of service for commercial at the volumetric rate. And the summer on the right, same story. So if you have access to non-pot, your bill is going to be a little bit lower. It's going to go up with the proposed. If you do not have access, your bill is going to be a little bit higher as you use more. It's also going to go up a little bit as you use more, but at those lowest levels, it will be about the same. Okay, this is we maintain a regional bill comparison. We find it really useful. We always get this question. I want to caveat it before we look at it any further, is that this is an apples to oranges comparison. There's no way you can look at two utilities and compare them directly. Every utility is at a different stage in investment, has different population, has different customer types, has different water rights and resources. But we recognize that everybody wants to know what their neighbors are paying and how it compares. So this is, you can see, these are all Colorado cities. We have, this chart is actually split. The navy portion of it is the fixed portion of the bill, and the green portion of each bar is the variable, the volumetric charge. So there's more information baked in here, but the main takeaway, as you can see, is those two blue arrows at the top. So you are just above Lafayette now, and you'd go up a couple to be just above Windsor with the proposed changes. This is residential, 3/4 inch, 8 kgals of use.
For the 2025 rates.
2025 rates, yes, thank you. Yep, and that's another great caveat, is that we don't know what any of these other communities' rates will be in 2025. So these are your 25 rates, they are not their 25 rates. So another example of how this isn't exactly apples to apples, but. And I can tell you, because I work with many of these communities, that their rates are going up as well. So
Nobody's are decreasing.
nobody's are decreasing, that is for sure. Yeah. And that's all I've got. So I'm here for questions.
Questions, comments?
Comment.
Okay.
Outstanding presentation.
Yes, very.
Spoke my language the entire way through. It's crystal clear.
Excellent.
Nice.
Yes, very great presentation. Anybody have questions or anything else?
I do, but let everybody else.
So
Okay.
my first question is the meter size versus the gallons. I'm not putting that together why it matters if the residential has a 3/4 inch or 1 inch. Volume usage is volume usage. Is there associated fees that as that meter size increases that we have to bake into these numbers? Is that why we're using a 3/4 inch?
Yes, so the meter size basis and why the fee is different for each size is because for the system fees, the development fees, you're buying a portion of the capacity of the system. And as the city, you need to be able to provide service at whatever level to everybody who is connected. So you have to make an assumption about, based on the meter size, how much water they are going to use, and you have to make sure you have that available and ready. So that's why we use capacity as the basis for the fees, and it's the same when it comes to meter charges, is that you have built your system to serve a certain number of customers, and if you are going to connect with a larger meter size, you are reserving more capacity, so to say.
It makes absolute sense. Thank you.
So I have a follow-on to that one, though. To me, so when you're looking at apartment complexes, condo complexes, you're not, like, so the idea of why we're charging people less if they use less is simply to encourage people to use less water. Is that basically a true statement?
No, it's also because, it costs per each unit of water. So if you use more in a certain amount of time, the system has to be sized larger to accommodate your peaking behavior. So if everybody used the average amount of water, the system could be half as big as it is. But in order to accommodate everybody watering their lawn in July at the same time, you have to have a system that's built to push that much water out on those days at peak, your driest, your hottest days. So if you are consistently using more, there's a cost associated with that, with the sizing of the system, and that's what gets baked into those higher volumetric tiers.
Okay, so then maybe my question is still relevant. Just for sake, how many units does Crescent Cove have?
264.
264. So they're going to have way more than the 16,000 or 22,000 thing. So does it account for the fact that they're providing water for 264 residents?
So I believe, and I'd have to confirm this, that apartment complexes are not in the residential tiered structure. They would be falling under the non-residential, the commercial. So they're not going to be sized up that way based on that tier. The reason we do that, just a little bit of background, is we consider apartments as non-residential or commercial is because they behave more similarly to commercial customers. So the main driving thing with residential customers is often lawns, right? You're getting a lawn. When you have an apartment complex, you're much less likely to have that same summer peaking. They behave much more similarly to commercial customers who have a lower summer peak. So the tiered structure isn't as appropriate for them because you're exactly right. If you have a 2-inch meter and you have 50 units, you're going to be in that top tier from day one, no matter what you do. So that wouldn't be appropriate for apartments. So we put those into the kind of commercial is the category we've called it. It's probably a bad name for it, but it is, the residential is going to be just those single family and I believe duplexes as well.
But we're raising the rates higher on those customers than we are on residential customers.
Yeah, based on the cost of service, they are not paying their fair portion currently in the current rate structure. The residential customers are subsidizing. Your single family customers are subsidizing the other customers currently.
Any other questions? Or Fred, go ahead.
Well, it seems like not too long ago, back in the gym era, I believe it was, we attempted to adjust the rates on Exhibit 15 and do away with that disparity between the residential and the commercial rates. And not so sure about the non-pot, but so we didn't get those adjustments made right apparently, and we're doing it again.
If I may, we haven't done this water rate study for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
This is decades overdue of work to ensure that we have that equitable balance in our rate structure. We've done this work for wastewater and we've done this work for storm drainage, but we have not done water yet.
Okay, maybe it wasn't the water rates. It was something to do with the disparity between commercial and.
Right.
Actually, when Melanie last worked with us, we had a similar disparity for wastewater.
Yeah, I think you're yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're just bringing everything into check, which I appreciate.
That's right. And I will kind of add a little context is that anytime we do a cost of service, even if you do them every 3 years, which is a little bit overkill, honestly, but if you do them every year, every 3 years, you're going to see a little bit of fluctuation over time, just based on how plumbing fixtures change, how behavior patterns change, how different customers, how the makeup of your system changes in terms of shifting from residential to multifamily to commercial. So we're always going to see a little bit of a shift. When you haven't done a study in 20 years, we have the potential to see a larger shift. And that's all that's happening here. That is recognizing that it is a large shift, why we're phasing it in over 4 years. So we're not kind of jumping next year with a big change for, really it would be the non-pot and the commercial customers who are going up to cost of service. Yeah.
Well, I knew there was something that when I was looking through this, it sounded real familiar with the percentages, so that's why I questioned it. The thing, so basically next year, everybody's if they use 16,000 gallons or less, they're going to pay an additional $15 a month.
If they use 16,000 gallons or less, they're going to pay less than, it looks like around $11 is how much the bill is going to change, or less. So you can see here, so on this graphic, 16 it's just 2 over from that purple bar there. That's the change in the bill. So if you look at your rates, what they have to be next year to collect enough revenue, so compared to the cost of service rates next year, that's going to be your impact. It's going to be just over $10. I don't know exactly. It's my estimate, maybe around 11, under 11. But that would be the impact, because you do get those first 4 kgals at a lower cost per kgal. Everybody gets those at that lower cost. So you're building a little bit there in terms of how much the bill in total. So you know your bill's going to go, you can see it here, the bill's going to go down for those first four, and then it builds a little bit back up, but it only goes up, actually increases when you get to 6, and then proportionate there. So everybody feels the impact of those first 4 kgals. As you go up, the increase does go up.
So then there's no need for an example of a bill, because if someone asks us in public, my bill's gonna go up, well, the statistical average is gonna be $9 if you use 14,000 gallons.
Right.
And that's a baked-in cost. It's not gonna add other fees, right? So if my current bill is $236, I should expect, if I'm at 14,000, a flat $9 rate in next year.
Right, for your water.
Okay,
A $9 rate
increase.
increase, yes, a $9 increase after the 6% is incorporated. So if you made no changes to the rates, so if you held your rate structure and did the necessary 6% increase, that rate compared to the cost of service rates, that's the $9 change. So it will be, if you're looking at the month before the rate change to the cost of service rate change, it will be more than $9
6%
because,
plus 9.
right,
Okay, because we've got the 6% annual increase plus the new usage rate,
right.
so 6%, okay.
So this is revenue neutral that we're looking at. So if you did if you did a 6% across the board for the first 6 months of the year, and then you change the rate structure for the second 6 months, the 6th month and the 7th month, you'd see a $9 difference. 90% of your customers would see $9 or less.
Plus
But-
6%,
But this, yes. So if you're going from the previous year, yes.
about $22 instead of 9, based on that 14.
I'd have to do the math. I don't know if
Just
it's,
the-
It just, yeah, that's about, yeah.
So, but the 49% of people really aren't gonna see a reduction in their bill.
No, they'll see a 6% less the negative that is pulling down,
Right,
so
yeah,
maybe
so-
5% decrease.
Exactly.
this is revenue neutral. So this is saying if you did nothing except collect enough revenue with your existing rates versus the cost of service rates. So this is a comparison of the rate structure change, not the overall revenue change.
This is a great way to get it back into alignment.
Mm-hmm, it is.
This is gorgeous.
Yeah.
So what
I
about,
think on you have another slide that has the residential potable, bill impact. I think
One?
I don't like bar graphs.
kind of, maybe that might put it a little bit
Yeah,
perspective.
that's right.
That's like, was that slide 21 or whatever it is?
21.
So then the average
Yes.
person is allowed 0.46 acre feet. So they're allowed 149,891 gallons a year, 1,200, or 12,490 per month. And you're basing it on 14? I think I just vomited at the mouth. I'm calculating things. Move on, please.
Other questions?
are we moving on? Okay,
Anything else?
That was not a question. That was me.
Go ahead.
I was just waiting here. So at first I was a little alarmed about the non-potable needing to go up 120%. I think I talk really loud.
No, it's off.
All right, are we on now?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, so at first I thought when I saw the 120.6% for the non-potable, I was alarmed. I thought people are just gonna not use non-potable, but the way that it's structured now is less alarming. Still a little concerning though is that we're more expensive than Greeley and Windsor, and especially Greeley when we are known to have more attainable, affordable housing here. I was a little concerned about the rates, but what I do like is the lower tier.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of single people and like I think my husband and I use 1,800 gallons, and yes, we do take showers and wash clothes and clean and also water livestock. So I'm really happy to see that we are more scheduling our tiers according to the wastewater where water coming in is equaling water going out, especially when there's such a range on how many people are living in a household. So that makes me really happy. So my question though is the non-metered non-pot. What are we doing with that? That's obviously not in this structure. So are we adjusting any of that, or are we non-metered non-pot?
That there was an adjustment.
Willowbrook,
Oh,
yeah,
That's the east side of Evans is non-metered non-pot.
yeah. Ditch water.
So and I'd have to look again, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but I do believe that the majority of the non-metered, non-pot customers are in Willowbrook. There are a couple other fees that aren't included in here. There's a monthly fee for some of the communities for access to the non-pot, which is part of, it's essentially a buy-in, a capital fee that's separate from the rates. I'd have to look at exactly who that is, but there's a couple other things. For the analysis, what we assumed was that the unmetered non-pot customers are using the same as the metered non-pot customers, recognizing that that's probably not the case. There isn't a better way to estimate that without kind of overinflating it. So that's what the cost is based on in terms of how we came up with the cost per kgal of non-pot. We did base it on assuming all of the non-pot water being used, not just the metered non-pot water. So from an analysis side, we've taken it into account. From a rate side, we have the Willowbrook, and then I think again, I'd have to look, and Jackie, I don't know if you know off the top of your head. I do remember us talking about this and setting it up. I think it would just be the assumed average usage times the number of kgals. That sounds right. So if you have an assumed average usage based on the customer data of how many kgals of non-pot water is used at your typical metered non-pot home, that's the number. Multiply that by the 330 and 370, in 2025. That's your monthly non-pot
That's
charge.
billed at per acre,
The
Evans ditch.
The ditch water is.
ditch water, yeah.
So that's what I was asking is if we're restructuring that fee here too, or are we leaving that alone?
I think we're leaving it alone at this point. Ty, you're welcome to hop in if you'd like as well. I know Justine has been doing a fair amount of work on projecting some of the costs for the Evans Ditch system and what it would take to continue to operate that. That was one of the factors that we didn't have the data for when we started this rate study, to have good inputs to recommend any changes. So there are still a few pieces that aren't incorporated in these recommendations, the ditch one being one. We'll have new information from Greeley all the time. This is something that we'll have to have as a more iterative process. I mean, we won't wait 20 years to do this again. We'll wait a couple and have some new inputs and hopefully not make as many changes, but the ditch is a huge one that will be one of our next focus points.
Yeah. Great question.
I'd like to get this on the record. On this paperwork, on that first slide, it was left off of there. The less contributed capital, and on the potable infrastructure, it's at 0.65 million. And on the non-potable infrastructure, it was at 1.16 million. So it sounds like we're collecting money for non-pot infrastructure and we're not using it. We're not building that system out.
Are you talking about the cost basis here in terms of there not being a future cost basis?
Yeah, it was that first slide, existing cost basis.
Yeah, so the existing cost basis, the future cost basis just means you're not investing in growth to the system. You have the capacity to serve future customers without building more. The dollars will go towards the system still. There's plenty of capital costs associated with the non-pot system. It's just not expansion cost, right? Those dollars that come in will still go to capital and they'll still go to be invested in the non-pot system. They're just not building capacity for customers because you have capacity. You can see that here. You have the capacity for your future expansion needs in the non-pot system already. So the dollars aren't based on future expansion costs because there are none, because you have the capacity, but the revenue that's coming in will be used on the system to maintain and make sure that it's available to customers going forward as well.
Well, that's my point. It's not being, the non-pot system is not being built out. So that's the point I want to make in the record.
So so maybe, let me see if I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. So you're saying additional money is not being put into the non-pot system to expand the non-pot systems to those that don't currently have non-pot?
That's, yeah.
That's
part of
essentially
it.
what you're
That's
saying?
Part
Okay.
of it.
Okay.
That's
I
part
think
of it.
if you did that, the rates for the non-pot system would be so outrageous, because to expand non-pot system to the entire city that does not have it would be like a $20-30 million project. That would probably take off the people that are on non-pot to actually want to use their non-pot, because their rates will be so enormously high and cost prohibitive that they wouldn't want to touch it. So I think you have to really look at the balance. I think if you want to expand the non-pot system through Evans, we'd have to look at another revenue stream in order to do that. But based on the way this would work, it would never be obtainable, and it would never be able to be, it would be cost prohibitive for anybody on the non-pot to even want to use it.
Right, but what that doesn't mean is that we're not encouraging or requiring
Right,
non-pot for
right.
new future development. So you're right, it's, should we want to add non-pot to existing
But
infrastructure?
we're not providing it to the new infrastructure at Quick Trip. And it's, in a few other places,
Because we can't.
it's,
Because we
Yeah.
can't.
because you can't.
So we're saying that, they're saying that when it's feasible to provide it, they're going to. But it's just astronomically expensive to put that non-pot in there on the reverse side, unless you have an idea on how we can revenue stream that.
So we're gonna keep charging our citizens for treated water through Greeley and keep raising those treated water rates at an astronomical rate forever, because we're too chicken to take and put in the non-pot system for the residents
I would
or
wonder,
the new businesses.
wonder the cost comparison.
I don't know, we can stick in a new water line, we keep upsizing the line. We're upsizing a sanitary sewer line for 3 blocks over on State Street
No,
for $2 million.
We understand your
we're
passion
understanding
about it.
passion. I do. I'm with you, Fred. I am with you. I'm with you on this. It's just unfortunately that we have to figure out a way to make it affordable to where we wouldn't have to really raise the rates astronomically. I don't know. I'm not a city engineer. I don't know what that piping system looks like, how that would be, how the meter structures would run. There's so much more to that than we'll ever figure out here. That would be something that would be completely need to be done by an engineering study to see what the actual cost of that. I'm not disagreeing with you, Fred. I think it's a great idea if it could be obtainable. I just don't know how that would be obtainable and what that engineering study would look like to even know if that would be obtainable or not. Maybe that's something we can look into the future, but as of now, it's just not obtainable. And like I said, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just right now, it's just not obtainable. You know, I wish we could. I wish we could, but it's just it's just not attainable at this time. You know.
I don't have any other questions. I think the presentation was great.
I just want to say one more thing about the cost of the non-pot. I'm sorry,
No, go ahead, please.
is that I appreciate it, keeping it low to encourage our
Absolutely.
people to use it, the people that can use it, so anyways.
Yeah, and just I didn't mention this as we went through it, but one of the goals with the non-pot and the reason we use some of that Willowbrook contractual revenue above cost of service towards it, is we wanted to keep that cost per kgal of non-pot below that first tier of potable water for all customers throughout the forecast. So you can see even in 2028, when we get out there, we're at 629 for those first 4 kgals. It's still 601 for the non-pod. So recognizing that there are additional costs to that system, but it is still a more affordable per kgal cost than treated water for those customers who have access, which I recognize is its own challenge throughout the city, but that was one of our goals.
The numbers are really nice too.
Now,
I have a
sorry.
question because I forgot what
Go
we
ahead.
talked about. So the Willowbrook monthly non-pot, you know, we pay that every month for 12 months. Do we also pay the non-potable water fees?
No.
Okay,
Nope.
so we're paying $31.50, for example, versus $303. I cannot remember why. Can you tell me why?
So when we purchased the Willowbrook system, you were already paying a fixed quarterly rate
Mm-hmm.
for that system. And so what we did was just to split that quarterly rate into a monthly rate. And we've kept that consistent for users until we have data to better gauge the usage, because those are non-metered usage out there, which I know is also a high priority. Ty's nodding in the audience. It's something that we would like to figure out how to fund to get meters on the Willowbrook system as well, so that we have better data. And that would be another thing that we'd love to bring back for a future rate study, is to have a cost of service for that particular water to really see if it's different than our
I just
otherwise
couldn't
non-pot
remember
usage.
what the reasoning was, so thank you. And this year would be great for me. I didn't use any. My systems need work, so
Oh, I was gonna
Right,
say,
right,
where's your yard?
yeah.
Well, and
it looks horrible. But
going to what Tammy was just saying there, I think we've done a good job at encouraging the people on non-pot systems, because one of the few complaints I've had was my non-pot is down, my bill is going up because of that. So that means we are properly incentivizing the usage of the system.
Absolutely. I don't have any questions because Laura and Chris actually asked a couple of the questions I had, because I wasn't sure about how apartments and townhomes and condos were included and how they were included, and she was talking about the 120%. So I saw that too, and that was one of the things I wrote down. So I think this presentation was great. I think everything, I'm definitely in favor of this. And I will just say in all transparency, this took a little work to get through the Water and Sewer Board. They actually wanted to scrap the tier, the 0 to 4, and they wanted it from 0 to 8, because in their mind, they felt that people that were using the potable water system were being penalized more because they have to use it to irrigate their lawn. And they wanted to see a different tier, 0 to 8, 8,001 to 16,000, 16. They wanted to change the model because they felt that just because they don't have non-pot, they shouldn't be penalized for trying to water their lawn, keep their irrigation up and everything. And they wanted this completely changed. And when we spoke at the last Water and Sewer Board meeting, they were really upset because they asked staff to include that model in there, and it couldn't be, because this was a rainwater study that we've spent a lot of time, money, and effort. It just couldn't be incorporated in there without doing a whole new study. So I talked to them and I said, look, maybe because it took 20 years to get this done, maybe when we do it in 5 years, if you have some of those concerns, maybe at that time, maybe say, hey, what does this look like if we added this in? Though I said, I don't know what future councils would look at, I said, but we're encouraging reduction in use of water conservation. When you look at it at the end of the day, if you want to use more water to have that nice green lawn or whatever you want to do to irrigate, you're going to have to pay more. Potable water costs more. So if you want to use more to irrigate your lawn or do whatever, you're going to have to pay more. I don't think we should build another tier in there for those that want to irrigate their lawn because they don't have access to it. That was just my opinion, but I said in the future, if you want that incorporated, maybe we can look at it maybe 5 years down the line or 3 years down the line when we do this again. So after some back and forth, I think they got that, and they did put it on the record that they would like to maybe possibly see that in a future rate study, what that additional tier would look like. So after a little bit of back and forth negotiating with them, I said my side, and they seemed to compromise and agree with that was probably the best way to go forward.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you for mentioning that. The piece that I forgot to include in your packet is additional work that Heather did for us too. So she reached out and looked at what that first tier looks like for a number of our local communities, just to better understand the rate structure that other communities are moving towards. And across the board, we saw 3, 4, 5K gals at that first tier, either as a best practice that communities are trying to work toward. Ty's seen this in his past work as well. Melanie also really helped us to feel like that 4,000 gallons was not only supported by the data of the rate study, but also then by the best practices that other cities are moving towards and trying to encourage that water conservation and give you some financial benefit for doing so and being mindful of water usage as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, because you're exactly right. It is best practice in the industry when possible to have that first tier really cover that indoor use. So it's about conservation. It's also about affordability, which is the other kind of big issue that all water systems are facing right now. So by splitting out that first tier, we are able to bring that fee down for those first 4K gals. So really provide those customers who most need it a little bit of a lower bill if they stay within that tier. So that's the other side of it. It's both about conservation as well as affordability, while still, collecting the necessary revenue we need to, and making sure it's still fair and equitable. Everybody's paying the appropriate amount, but by splitting it that way, we can add a little bit of that too.
That's why I love the numbers.
And I'm glad that we're going to do this a little bit more often. I'm glad we're not going to be in a situation like Wellington or Broomfield is with their astronomical 50% increase for, I think, Broomfield residents possibly, and 1,000+ % on some people in Wellington because they didn't plan for the future and they didn't plan for all of their growth and expansion. So I'm glad that we did this now. We'll do this a little bit more often, so that way we're keeping up with the best practices and looking at our future. So
At least with a good forecast and keeping our finger on the pulse.
absolutely.
I absolutely agree with you, Mayor.
Credit to staff there, because we see a lot of these, and to your point, 6% is pretty low. That it's just above inflationary considering the costs that everybody's facing right now. So really, your utility is really healthy and in really great shape and able to absorb the upcoming NISP costs and other things without a huge jump in rates for your customers. So
Thank you. Thank you to you and your staff. Thank you to you and your staff as well. And thank you to you and your staff for helping put this all together. So I really appreciate your time and everything. And anybody, we'll have this on September 3rd's council meeting.
Yeah, it'll be
For-
incorporated in the
Okay.
enterprise fund review that we do on the 3rd, and then formalized in the fee schedule that we'll bring probably early November for formal adoption.
Okay.
But with your nod tonight, we'll start working pretty heavily on communication to residents. This is exciting and also could pose a challenge for some, those higher water users. We definitely don't want to surprise anyone, so we'll be working on additional communication to help folks understand what the costs are and what it really takes to get water to your tap. And I think the more education we can put out, the better. A lot of other local communities have used a lot of really great resources, I think, that we can also share and just help to educate each other. So we'll get moving on that really quickly, though.
Great. Thank you. Anything else? Nope. I think we're good. Thank you so much again.
you so much.
Appreciate you.
Great
Your time.
presentation.
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Say anything after I got scowled at from Mr. Crabtree.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you for your time. We'll meeting adjourned.